Welcome everyone to another episode of FitFam. I'm here with Miss Natural Olympia, Hilary Grant.
And I'm here with the formulator, Douglas Grant.
Hey.
Hey, how's it going, baby?
Good. Today we're actually going to go into the foundation, the core of really the most important subject, according to research, that affects your health.
This one's exciting. All of them are exciting, but I really like this one. This is basically Nutrition 101. We're going right from Doug's book that he wrote a while back. If you want a copy, we would love to send you one.
For free.
For free, because it's awesome. And what was cool is when we did do a little, what do you call that? On my Instagram when we were asking, a poll. When we were doing a poll on my Instagram, what people wanted to hear most of, mindset and nutrition were really close.
They were right there.
Basically, our whole purpose in doing Nutrition 101 is to explain macronutrients and what foods contain which carbohydrate, fat, or protein, and how they're used in the body, and then how you want to consume those for your daily diet.
Yeah. So help you with whatever you want to try to accomplish. If you want to lose body fat, you want to just maintain, have more energy, or maybe you need add a little more density to your body, then you need to know what to do. And I think that really comes back down to the foundation of why this is important. Why do we feel this is so critical? Well, one of the reasons, in fact, it was backed up in the Lancet, the journal in 2019, is this was a landmark study for us that happened then. It really changed everything in our industry because we've always known nutrition's important, but it was always like second fiddle to, hey, make sure you don't smoke, right? Smoking is the biggest problem out there, as far as causing disease. But in 2019, it changed. What happened was from the study, they found out that nutrition, so your choice of what foods you put into your body, is the number one determining factor as to whether you have optimal health, energy, vitality, live a long life, or you actually have dis-ease, right? You actually, have low energy, you don't think clearly, you die at a younger age, and really the fact is that no matter what age you live to, you have this poor quality of life. Yeah. And so this changed it for us. Nutrition is king. So really, if there's anything that you focus on in your life that you should maybe study a little bit because it really will affect, your health, is nutrition.
Absolutely. And what's funny about that is I think most of us associate health and vibrancy with nutrition and what we're eating, but few of us associate when we're feeling like garbage or disease or, lack of energy, associate that with what we're eating. Isn't that strange? It goes hand in hand, but we don't always associate it.
Yeah, and it's very important to understand that exact point, is that nutrition is the key. And I think that to understand it even further, is we've known for thousands of years the importance of nutrition, all the way back to Hippocrates.
Right. What is it? Food shall be your medicine, and medicine shall be your food.
Absolutely. Whoop, whoop. Something like that. And so, he made that point to try to help people understand that if you aren't feeling good, and that it's usually due to our lifestyle and food, or at least even if it's not, food really should be our medicine, right? And that's the key. And so I think that that's the understanding, is that our food will either be to our benefit or detriment based on the types of foods we eat. That's why we're talking today about macronutrients. So explain the difference between macronutrients and micronutrients.
Okay, so on another podcast, we'll go into micronutrients. So your micronutrients are your vitamins, your minerals, your enzymes, your probiotics, right? Mm-hmm. We'll talk a little bit about enzymes today because it's important to know those enzymes, how they associate with each macronutrient. But micronutrients we need in smaller doses, right? And then your macronutrients are your actual food groups. They're your carbohydrates, your proteins, and your fats.
And we need a lot of those, and that's why we focus on them, because since we have to have so many of the macro amount of the carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, what type we get really determines our health, because it's the main thing the body's running off of. So why don't we just start with the big daddy, carbohydrates?
Well, let's do, but before we do that, what is the main purpose?
Good point.
The three things that nutrition really...
Yeah, the three main functions?
Yeah.
Yeah, so energy, structure, and regulation of chemicals and hormones in the body. So what do we mean by that? Is that food, your carbs, proteins, and fats, are the determining factor of how much energy you have or lack of.
Okay.
Carbs, proteins, and fats determine your structure. In other words, the building of your muscle, of your bones, of the chemicals, of your hormones. Those types of factors are critical with macronutrients and that regulation of those hormones, an endocrine system. So when you're talking about energy, structure, and regulation, all are based on the types and the amount of the macronutrients, carbs, proteins, and fats. So thanks for checking me on that.
You're welcome. That's what I'm here for. Okay, so carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are usually something that you'll eat every day. I know I do. I love me some carbs. Carbohydrates come in the forms of fruits, vegetables, and grains. Those are your carbohydrates. And they're either in two different categories. They're either your simple carbohydrates or they are your complex carbohydrates. Help me if I mess up. But your simple carbohydrates are broken down into glucose quickly, and they can be used as energy very quickly. Wow. Right? Your complex carbs take a little bit longer to digest, and those are typically stored for future energy.
Absolutely. And so if we get into the structure of that, is carbohydrates have three parts to it: carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Okay, so carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. Now we're not going to go too deep, but just think of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And if you have a whole bunch of them, it's a complex carb. It takes longer to break down. It allows the body time to assimilate the actual final byproduct of carbohydrates, which is glucose.
Okay, so give me an example of when I would want a simple carbohydrate. What activity or, whatever, what would I need? Why would I use a simple carbohydrate over a complex carbohydrate?
Good question. So simple carbohydrates, we really don't want much of.
Okay.
They convert to glucose really quickly in the body, but there might be a time that you're just down and you've used up all of your energy. Like, for example, even a diabetic, right? They lose that blood sugar, their glucose, and so they need something to get them going. A lot of times we'll use it with athletes, so when they're running marathons or just throughout the day, they need a little shot of something that's a simple carbohydrate, but for the most part, not. So let me back up just a hair with that, because if you have the carbon, the hydrogen, oxygen, and if you have a bunch of them together, a whole bunch, then that's complex. It's like a sweet potato. It's like Lego blocks, right? You're building it, and the more of them, you get the complex carbs. So most of your vegetables, right? Most of your whole grains, with everything intact, with the fiber intact and the nutrients intact, those are complex carbs. The simple carbs are more of your sugars, right? Or the things that were once a complex carb, and because we've taken all of the fiber and the nutrients out of them, we converted them into a simple carb, like the difference between white flour and like multigrain or wheat. Big difference from the natural grain with all of the fiber and the nutrients, which is complex, versus a white flour, which is, I think, probably the worst carbohydrate on the planet, because it's not only simple and it digests quick into sugar in the body, to glucose, it actually robs your body of nutrients, and that's one of the big problems with it. But we can get more into that. But that's a simple and complex carb concept of it. Just think of a bunch more building blocks, and you want a bunch of them when it comes to carbohydrates, so that the body can slowly over time break them down and deliver glucose. Glucose is the key.
Okay, so a carbohydrate is carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And what determines a different carbohydrate is just the structure and how they're placed, correct?
Boom.
Okay, so a sweet potato is structured one way, but it still has those three components, versus like steel cut oats. They're just assembled differently, but...
Absolutely, or grapes, or anything.
Okay.
Yep. And I think that's important to understand that when we're talking to macronutrients, each one breaks down, and its final substance that the body uses is different. So carbohydrates break down into glucose. Glucose is the key. And if something doesn't work right from the time we take a bite of that apple, that carbohydrate, from the time we take a bite of it or take it into our body until it gets to glucose, if something happens there and stops the process of breaking it down to glucose, all heck breaks loose, and that's not good.
Okay, so let's go through that then. Let's talk about the digestion process of carbohydrates.
Perfect. So let's go back to like our sweet potato example.
Okay. Doug's favorite food.
And so we have the sweet potato, and let's say we consume it. So in our mouth, we're chewing it. And if that sweet potato's raw, it contains something called enzymes. So one thing you're talking about, we're gonna talk about micronutrient, right? And so we have this sweet potato in our mouth, we're chewing it, and if it has the enzymes in it because it's raw, hasn't been cooked or processed, then the body won't secrete many enzymes from the salivary glands, and then it'll go into the stomach, and in the stomach a signal is sent to the pancreas saying, hey, we need more help digesting this food because it was cooked, it was processed, it's really foreign to the body, it wasn't raw, right, or it wasn't a whole food. And so the body will ask for a bunch more help and take energy away. That's why we get tired when we eat many times, because our body's calling on its own enzyme supply and help to be able to digest that food. So we have that complex carb, in this case the sweet potato.
So we chew it in our mouths, then we swallow it down our esophagus.
Right, now it turns something called chyme, it gets into our stomach, and then the acids in the stomach will activate other enzymes. Acid doesn't digest anything. Acid activates enzymes to digest your food. And so then it tries to break that carbohydrate, that complex carbohydrate, down into what's called a disaccharide. Okay, so a disaccharide, you're like, oh, we're getting too far, crazy here. No, it's pretty simple. Disaccharides are things like lactose, maltose, right? Fructose. And so now it's in this disaccharide.
So it's broken down further into this disaccharide. It was a complex carb. And now it's down to a disaccharide.
Right.
And now what?
And now other enzymes have to break it down to keep it simple, the usable form glucose. There's a few other factors there, but just, to energy,
Let's go
to
simple.
glucose.
Let's go kindergarten.
Let's go there.
That's for me. I like the kindergarten level.
So complex carb to a disaccharide, and then hopefully down to glucose. But now there's the key, is when it's in this disaccharide form, if it doesn't get broken down further, many times we have allergies, we have issues to it. And the main factor, the easy way to explain is the one that most people know about when it comes to dairy.
Okay, so a lactose intolerance.
Lactose intolerance, like lactose being the disaccharide. If we don't have the enzyme lactase to break it down, or we didn't consume a food that had its own enzymes. So let's say.
So what is like when you see milk at the grocery store, like Lactaid, what did they do there?
Right, so Lactaid, they just added the enzyme lactase to the milk so that now it can be broken down. One of the biggest problems in the world today is the non-digestion of foods. And if you consume foods that are cooked and processed, and milk is a great example, homogenized, pasteurized milk, that means it's processed, it no longer contains enzymes to break it down from a carbohydrate to a disaccharide, especially down to glucose. That's why so many people can be lactose intolerant from that. But if they drink raw milk, they don't have a problem because of the lactase enzyme. So to not get off track too much, the key is to take this carbohydrate, right, whatever it might be that we consume, the fruit, the vegetable, the grain, and break it down to glucose. And glucose is the main factor that we're talking about here. And the more complex the carbohydrate, the better off it is for you, because then the body can control when it gets broken down to the glucose.
Okay, so carbohydrates' main job is to provide energy to the body, correct?
Yep.
Okay.
And so let's talk about what really for people to take home right now. Well, then how do I really know if something's complex or not, or how can I help my body with the digestion of carbohydrates when I eat, right, fruits or vegetables or grains, to ensure that it's more complex?
Okay, so fiber really helps with that whole process, right? So fiber is found in your fruits and your vegetables and your complex carbohydrates.
Right, in your grains with that.
Right.
Or you can add it back, but that's really the key, is fiber is one of the biggest factors that help your body so that you don't have the carbohydrate be too simple to turn into glucose too fast.
So if you have something and if you have a carbohydrate and you have fiber with it, it doesn't spike your insulin levels, correct?
Yeah, that's it. Let's go into that part real quick. Is that okay for a second?
Yeah, for sure.
So remember, our job is to get carbohydrates broken down to glucose, but not too fast. Right? And here's why. If we have too much glucose, we have this condition called death. If we can't get rid of it, and then if we have too little glucose,
tough condition to get over.
we have this condition called
death.
So, and we make that point, meaning that the body wants to control, or it needs to control, the amount of glucose in the bloodstream at all times. Too much is bad. Too little is bad. And so we have these really, really powerful chemicals in the body that help us with that. If we consume too many simple carbohydrates, a lot of sugars, right?
Like just straight up candy. Simple
Straight up candy.
Soda.
Right. Table sugar. A lot of sodas, white flour, straight white flour, pastries, things like that. Right. Then all of a sudden our blood sugar comes up, our glucose goes up. And if it goes up too high, we die. But think about like diabetics and that have too high a blood sugar a lot. What happens? A lot of times it affects the pressure. So the pressure behind the eyes will come. Eyesight goes many times with, type 1 diabetics so fast. And it affects the blood because of that pressure, right? So it's important to understand we don't want too much glucose in the bloodstream at one time because it causes these issues. So the body says, yeah, we know that. So it makes this thing called insulin. And insulin's job is to go in and say, oh, we got too much glucose in here, right? They ain't too many dadgum simple carbohydrates or whatever it might be. And let's get this glucose out of there before they die or before something, serious happens that would lead to death. And so insulin's job is to do that. And that's what diabetes is. People that have a hard time producing insulin aren't able to control that blood sugar, right? So insulin's important for that. So we want to make sure we do the best we can to protect the insulin in the body. And so we want to have more complex carbs. On the other end of that, if our blood sugar is too low, right, then we have another chemical called glucagon that's released to try to bring some of the blood sugar up, to pull things from the liver, some things called glycogen, some blood sugar stores, and to help. And so we have these major chemicals, and their main job, is just to keep the right amount of glucose in the bloodstream. That's why it's so important and why nutrition is so key in carbohydrates. Really, it's important to make sure we have them because it's your main source of energy, but make sure we're eating more whole food, complex carbohydrates. Again, vegetables, fresh vegetables, fresh from the fruit standpoint, berries, things like that. There are some fruits that will raise blood sugar a little bit, but if you combine them, you're good. And then whole grains.
So, and to make the point, complex carbs, it's not just that they have the fiber there with them. Complex carbs, your fruits, your vegetables, and then also your whole grains and oats also contain vitamins and minerals and antioxidants. So they're also providing actual nutrients for the body.
100%. That's really, really key to understand. And so, there's carbs that you'll hear the word empty carbs. And what that means is things like white flour, processed sugar, things like that are just straight carbohydrates with no nutrients, very little fiber, and those are the bad carbs. Those are the ones that we really want to stay away from the most. The more you can stay away from the table sugars, the white flours, the better you are.
A really good goal is to keep your sugars 50 grams or lower in a day, not counting the sugars that come from your raw, fresh fruit.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's key. And if people will do that, then they're going to find such a greater level of energy just keeping their sugar content under 50 grams minus, you don't count the berries and the fruits.
What about if I have, sugar-free items that, have sucralose? Is that better?
So here's the deal, and this is somewhat supposedly controversial out there. And we're going to do a full podcast on this one subject, but because it's a part of carbohydrates,
we better
I have so many people say, well, okay, then I don't want simple carbs. That's awesome. So I'm going to switch over from a regular soda to a diet soda. I'm going to switch over to these things that have these fake sugars and these chemicals called sucralose, aspartame are the main two. Let's just keep it there tonight. Sucralose and aspartame, because they don't raise your blood sugar. Oh my gosh, people. Okay, there really should not be a controversy about this, right? Sucralose causes a lot of damage in the body. It destroys the friendly bacteria in your gut. It causes so many factors with brain chemicals. Aspartame, I had a friend in college that did their thesis on this, showing that the damage to the brain is tremendous on aspartame. And so I know there's large corporations trying to tell you that they're okay. There's no sucralose in nature. There's no aspartame. They're made up chemicals that cause damage in the body. So here's the deal. Don't take any aspartame or sucralose in the body at all. It's not a carbohydrate, right? It does the body zero good and it causes damage.
Well, not only does it not do the body any good, it actually causes damage within the body. And specific different organs are damaged by sucralose and aspartame.
So stay away from synthetic sugars. And then just understand, a lot of people that will go out and say, okay, then I'm just going to change my diet to a diet that doesn't have carbohydrates in it. Like, carbohydrates are bad. You get that a lot now. Carbohydrates are not bad.
But we're going to talk about different diets in a different podcast.
We are, but for now,
we're sticking with just Nutrition 101 today.
Nutrition 101, just know that carbohydrates are key.
Yes.
And we're a big fan of them.
We
I think my main point.
Fans of carbohydrates.
And the problem with that is that the World Health Organization came out and said that 90% of the consumption of our carbohydrates mainly comes from the simple carbohydrates, and that's why carbohydrates get a bad rap.
Right.
So I didn't really want to get into so much all the different diets, but just why carbohydrates get a bad rap, and they shouldn't. It's because of your choice of the carbohydrates.
Got it.
Right?
And in Doug's opinion, right, following the studies and following science, Doug's opinion, 50 to 60% of your daily consumption of food should come from complex carbohydrates. Correct?
Right. So your macronutrient content should be about 60 carbohydrates, and then we'll get into the proteins and fats. But it's just not my opinion. It's also the cell's opinion. So all the cells in the body run mainly on about 60%, carbohydrates and glucose, and then 20% protein and fat. And we'll get into it. So it really is the perfect balance for the body. And we'll get to, at the end, how you can find out the percentage of the carbohydrates and those other things in your diet and how to figure it out yourself.
We'll do that at the end.
All right.
Okay, so our next macronutrient, and I'm probably going to shut up a lot through the rest of this and let Doug kind of explain everything, but our next one is fats. And your fats come from things like nuts. It comes from oils, obviously, and there's like different fats within proteins and that kind of thing, but your basic straight up fat content is from oils, avocados, nuts.
Avocados is a good one. It's one of the foods that has a high amount. Again, most foods have a little bit of carbohydrate, protein, and fat, but avocados are mainly fats, great fats. The oils, good or bad, are mainly fats also. And then there's a lot of foods like the nuts and that'll have higher fat content in them. And so we'll kind of talk about them when we're talking about fats, although they're a little bit more balanced. They're not like avocado, what's mainly fat.
Right.
But we are talking about the oils, avocados, and then even like some foods have just a higher content of fat in them than normal, like salmon, things like that, even though we think of salmon as a protein.
Right.
And so we'll talk about those things because it's really important where you get your fats from and the types of fats. So let's talk about fats.
Okay, let's talk about fats, but do we want to go into how they're broken down, or do you want to talk about saturated fats, unsaturated? Where do you want to go?
Okay, let's just start with how they're broken down in the body. And so remember, carbohydrates, the main function of carbohydrates is to get broken down, digested into glucose.
Okay.
Right?
Right.
And fats, their main job is to get digested down to fatty acids.
Okay.
And so
fatty acids are used within the body for what?
So we eat fats. If it gets broke down to fatty acids, we need fatty acids to make all the hormones in the body. Okay. So if you got hormonal imbalances.
Ladies, we need our fats.
Yes.
Our good fats.
Absolutely. That's the first place to go if you're having hormonal imbalance, guys or girls. Really is, do I have enough of the healthy fatty acids so the body can balance the hormones? That's the first place to go. So that's one thing. Fatty acids are critical for skin. And so that's really a great thing to be able to have your skin be clear and just function properly. It's the largest organ in the body, so we want the skin to be working properly, right?
Yep.
And then also it's critical for brain health. We know that even in the last probably 20, 25 years, the research has came out to show that fatty acids are critical for the function of the brain, to be able to deliver nutrients to the brain through the blood-brain barrier, for the function in the brain, to be able to help different chemicals be created in the brain from serotonin and dopamine, all the factors that deal with cognitive function, and also for memory too. So even to keep things at bay like dementia and Alzheimer's, fatty acids are really critical.
Yeah, so we get our good fats from your extra virgin olive oils, flaxseed oil, flax seeds. We get them from raw nuts, roasted nuts are different. It changes the structure, but raw nuts, avocado.
Coconut. Would you mean coconut?
Ooh, coconut. We haven't talked about coconut.
Okay, so let's talk about the different types of fats. Now we know that with carbohydrates we have complex carbs, remember that, and simple carbs. And really it's just how many of the Legos are put together that determine that. It's kind of the same concept with fats. We have saturated fats and unsaturated fats. Now, remember our talk about carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen?
Right.
It's the same concept with the fats. We have carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen, but not to get too deep. It's like we have a bunch of, carbons. Carbon, right? And you have a hydrogen on top of it and the bottom of it.
Okay.
And if all the way across the carbon structure, you have hydrogens on top of it, and we have the two ends, but just picture along there, C, H, all the way across. That is a saturated fat. Okay? That's your saturated fat. And what does that mean? A saturated fat usually is a fat that is solid. And so we have this saturated fat. Saturated fat. It can be solid. And the key with it is that we have everything across it, the hydrogens and the carbons, so that it's a little bit tougher to break down at times. Okay? And so the saturated fat is really critical. But an unsaturated fat is where a couple of those hydrogens, we have all the carbons, and then we have hydrogens, a couple of them might be missing, right? In the third chain, omega-3, omega-6 at the 6th level, anyways, on and on and on. And I think that it's important, that's where we get things you might hear of as omega-3, omega-6, omega-9.
Right.
It's where that ends up in that chain that determines the type of fat it is, whether it's saturated or unsaturated. So,
an essential fatty acid supplement, how important do you think that is for the typical American diet? Can we get our 3s, 6s, 9s from the foods that we're eating and get it consistently, or is it best to consume a fatty acid supplement?
Good question. So the omega-6, the fatty acids, omega-6 is critical for the body, but we get way too much of them in our diet, and it causes a lot of issues because we don't have the balance with the omega-3s. We hear about omega-3s a lot, right? And the EPA, DHA, all these things. But remember, just omega-3s. And so it is very tough for most people to get a balance of the omega-3s. We're getting all of the other fats in the diet, the omega-6s and the extremely saturated fats. And that's what causes this. That's why essential fatty acids from omega-3 standpoint is so important when supplementation, and we'll talk about it, but how about just macronutrients today? You really focus in on your extra virgin olive oils, avocados, and those things, and that will help us to keep that balance between the omega-3, the omega-6, omega-9s, that you need that balance. If we have balance, everything's great. If we're out of balance, we have too many omega-6 versus omega-3, just think about the balance and the structure, then we have issues.
And the cold pressed, unfiltered oils are the best, correct?
That's really the key. Fats are very temperamental.
Yeah,
fats are very temperamental. What I mean by that is it's very easy for the structure of fats
to disrupt them.
Just to disrupt them. That's a great way to look at it. And when you disrupt a fat, you no longer have just your basic, whether it's a saturated omega-3, omega-6, omega-9. Most of the time you have something called a trans fat. And a trans fat is just a fat that where the structure's been modified or something's happened to it, it's oxidized to where now it wreaks havoc in the body instead of bringing the benefits that fats, all the great things we talked about, can do to the body. And so that's really a huge problem. Heating of fats causes that issue. Anytime we take a fat and we try to what we call hydrogenate it, where you slam hydrogen in it, and so you have hydrogenated fats to be able to make
makes it like spreadable, right?
Spreadable.
Is that kind of
to make things hard and a lot of times to be able to put into mixes and stuff.
Okay.
Hydrogenated fats are extremely bad, and so for a lot of people, you're like, okay, we understand that heating it, so fried food is bad.
So processed harmful fats, fried food, margarine, anything with hydrogenated on the label. Your good fats, coconut, avocado, extra virgin olive oil. Can you tell us how the body digests fat? So
Absolutely.
We talked about how carbohydrates are broken down within the body. Let's talk about how fats are digested.
Okay, so really fats is interesting because it takes a lot of work to digest fats. The body only uses one enzyme called lipase to digest fats down to hopefully fatty acids, but the body goes through a lot of process. You heard of the gallbladder. Bile is sent from the gallbladder to help with the emulsification or the breakdown of fats in the body. The pancreas is secreting the enzyme lipase, especially if the fat's not raw. We get the raw fat, right? It's in it. But if not, you got the pancreas working, you got the liver working to the gallbladder producing bile. And we have all of these factors involved just to break down fats. Because if we don't break down fats, then it usually causes just this myriad of problems. We talked about fats that you need for brain function, fats you need for the skin, right? Fats you need for hormone production. All those things stop working properly, and we have these huge issues. And that's really key, is we need these essential fats for all those factors. And the body will send us signals. We like to look at the body like a car. You know, if you're driving down the road and the light comes on.
Doug likes to look at the body.
And a light comes on and says, you know, oil change soon, or, you know, tire going flat, whatever it is. Those are warning signals, and if we don't heed them, something bad's going to happen, right? And the same thing in the body is the body will come along, and all of a sudden we have these aches and these pains, you know, our gallbladder starts to hurt a little bit, or we have
referred pain, you start hurting up here, right?
In the shoulder, yeah, and it's a referred pain from the gallbladder. And our body, many times when we're taking in these bad fats and that, it will give these signals, and we should be heeding them, but many times we don't. And so finally the body's like, okay, you know, over time we're going to quit giving you those signals. They're just going to sometime blow, and it does. And fats are really the key with this. So I don't want to say much longer on, except for to help you understand that if you're having trouble with any of those things, right, with skin, with brain function, with hormones being balanced in the body, then what you want to do is take in more healthy fats, but the key is to get rid of the bad fats.
Okay,
right?
so cut fried food out entirely.
Boom.
Boom.
Fried food should be out, and you're like, oh, I'm never going to cut it out entirely. Look, cut it out the majority of the time. Have it be a treat. You'll like it even better if you can have it once in a while.
Yeah, and if you can live your life, and this is kind of how Doug and I really do try to live ours, 80-20, right? 80% of the time we're really following the Nutrition 101 guidelines that we're talking about right now. 20% of the time we give into some of the things that we love. For example, Doug's kryptonite is corn chips.
Yeah, chips.
Yeah,
chips and salsa.
Doug loves chips and
Southeastern
salsa.
Arizona.
So, but and we are, you know, we do great at not having it 80% of the time, but 20% of the time.
If I'm going to have some fat, it would be that. And so we work to bake our chips, right? Do things so that we don't have those fried fats. And so once in a while, we can, because we do have a liver, we do have gallbladder, do have kidneys, but it should be very seldom, and most people jump to it too fast. We like to say, look, pay the price if you've been off track to get your body where your body fat should be, and that you're at a healthy state, that then once in a while you can do that, and your body will just burn those things up if you choose. And it's really key to understand that we're talking about eating the healthy fats, and I think I've heard you make this point to a lot of clients, is that you're like, well, I do eat a lot of healthy fats, but if you eat a lot of bad fats too, it actually counters that.
It does counter that. It makes it harder to absorb the healthy fats. But also, I don't know if we want to go into this right now or if we're going to talk about it later, but the thing is that you can be eating, you know, thinking you're not getting a ton of calories, you know, you're eating really healthy because you're eating a lot of, like when I snack on raw nuts. You know, I do my MCTs in my morning coffee, that kind of thing, and thinking, you know, you're doing great things for the body. Well, you are doing good things for the body by getting a certain amount of healthy fats within your diet. But if the majority of your food is coming from fats that are higher calorie per gram than carbohydrates or proteins, then all of a sudden you're getting into excessive amounts of calories, and then you're going to gain weight.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is the truth still is that we have to look at calories in versus calories out when it comes to weight gain, right, or weight loss. There are some major factors now that weren't as big of a factor decades ago, and that's the processing of foods, making it so that it's not just a calorie type thing, but it's important, and I think we need to understand and back up just a little bit, is that carbohydrates, proteins, and fats, each of them have a certain amount of calories per gram. So like when we have grams or like ounces of chicken and things like that, we want to know how many calories are in our foods. And so to start with, when we're talking about carbohydrates, that's 4 calories per gram. right? So for every gram of a carbohydrate, we look at the weight of whatever it might be, a fruit, a vegetable, a grain, whatever it is, we get 4 calories per gram. Fat's a little different.
Yeah, fats is almost 10. So it's 9 something, but for the sake of tracking, let's just say 10. So
easier that way.
10 calories per gram of fat. And then proteins are back at the 4 calories per gram.
Absolutely. So we had an example with one of our top doctors from around the nation that came out to see us.
Yeah, she was eating really good fats, but the majority, what was happening is throughout her day when she would snack, it was a mainly fat-based snack, such as raw nuts. And then in her morning coffee, she was also doing her MCT, so her oils in her coffee to start her day. And then, of course, like later, she would have a salad with some other things in it, and that was really healthy. But when we kind of broke it down, you know, how much fat she was actually getting in a day, you know, we were looking at, 100 to, you know, maybe even close to 150 grams of fat per day. And, you know, when you add in your carbs and your proteins as well, now we're going a little excessive with calories.
Yeah, for her case, for her size and that,
Yeah.
it was too much. And so she was struggling with, why am I still not being able to lose as much body fat as she wanted? And she's in great shape, but to get that, you know, get down to the level she wanted as far as, you know, body shape and body fat, and it came down to consuming just way too many calories. Now, the only time you can get away with like eating as many calories as you want if you ate completely raw, like no cooked and processed food. You don't have to worry about it, but very few people do that.
Yeah,
so we have to look at how many calories a day our body's burning. And we're going to end with that to teach you exactly to know how many calories and give you a few tools that you can go to.
Yeah, we'll come back to that.
So let's jump to the next one. Anything else on fats you want to mention?
I don't think so.
Okay, just really critical is if you can get rid of all processed fats, right? The majority of the time, the high majority of the time. Right, your fried fats, any type of a fat that where the structure's been altered, like, you know, your hydrogenated fats, look at your labels, then you're going to be great. And then you just make sure you add in some of the good fats each day because they are critical. Got fats under control.
Perfect. So next we're going to talk about proteins. And proteins, typically you recognize protein as like your beefs, your poultry, your fish, your eggs. But it's also found in nuts. It's found in beans. It's found in rice, right?
A little bit, but lentils, beans,
whey,
soy, right? Soybeans, those types of things. And so then like powders and things, you hear a lot about whey protein and things like that, which is the protein that comes from dairy. Right, so again, with most foods, you have proteins, carbs, and fats. And when you take milk, okay, or dairy, and pull the whey protein out and make it a powder, that's your protein that comes from that comes from the dairy.
I don't know why proteins are so fun to talk about. For some reason, they are, though. I don't know if you feel that way, but proteins are made up of amino acids. So let's discuss. Well, I'm just. Thanks, babe.
That's a big one. It's important.
But so let's discuss the molecular structure of a protein.
Great. So again, let's go back to our Lego blocks, right?
Let's do it.
All right. So we have the Lego block. Let's say the Lego block is, like you said, an amino acid, right? And we have this amino acid, and that amino acid could be, you know, they got some really crazy names like tryptophan, the thing that we talk about that maybe makes you sleepy, you know, in the turkey, things like tryptophan, glutamine, glycine. Those are all names of these amino acids. So picture all these little Lego blocks, and each one's a different name, right? And so isoleucine, leucine, valine, all these different things. And we put these Lego blocks together. So we have single amino acids, and we start putting them together, we create what's called a peptide. So if we have a single amino acid, it's 1. But then when we have 2, all the way up to 99, okay? And say people say 50, but let's just make 99 to make it simple today. To 99, that's called a peptide, and that's a chain of amino acids. Okay, so one's a single amino acid, then we have a peptide, right? That's all the way up to 99 of those Lego blocks.
And what happens when we have 100 or more?
And then 100 or more, we have a protein. Right, so we have this protein. So now, what are some proteins? Like, what's one of the favorite ones? Meat.
Meat. Yeah.
So we have this meat. So meat can be thousands and thousands of amino acids bound together. That makes it a protein, right? It's over 99. And we have this protein, and then in the body, what happens is it starts to digest it down, and we'll get into that. But here's a cool thing. Remember how we talked about carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen make up fats? And that's also what makes up carbohydrates. protein, what makes it so cool is there's an extra factor with it. It's the only macronutrient that has one other guy in there called nitrogen. So now we have carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. That's what makes it a protein. It makes it so powerful.
That's why
and
it's so
phenomenal.
cool.
That's why it's so cool.
I don't know.
And so we have that structure. And so should we break down, get into the digestion?
Let's do it.
Okay. And so let's say we eat a bite of this protein. Let's say a piece of meat, right? We have beans, whatever it is. We have the bite of it. Let's do chicken, right? The famous bodybuilding proteins. We have chicken and we take a bite of this protein that has all these amino acids, thousands of them together. Then the body will secrete something called protease, the enzyme to digest protein.
Okay.
Right? And it digests it and starts breaking it down a little bit in the mouth, but not much. Mainly carbohydrates get broken down in the mouth from the amylase from the salivary gland. So it comes down the esophagus into the stomach, and the body will start secreting some of these protease, pepsin, protein digestive enzymes to help break it down, to try to get it broke down into at least a peptide, right?
Yeah.
Then it goes into the small intestines, and that's when most of the digestion occurs there, where all of a sudden the peptidase enzymes and all these enzymes come in. And if the protein was raw, they're already present. But most of us don't eat raw proteins.
No, that'd be disgusting.
Sushi? You like sushi?
No, I don't.
Okay, so, but because we cook most of our proteins, right, then our body doesn't have the enzymes to be able to break them down without asking the pancreas for help. And so all of a sudden the body's sending these enzymes to break down this protein. And if it doesn't break it all the way down to the amino acids, right, and we have a peptide, that's when the body says, oh, heck, we're going to do everything we can, and starts throwing water at it, get a little bloated, right?
Bloated.
Causes some gas,
right?
You know?
Yeah.
We're going to do a reference out to Arnold real quick.
Oh, go for it, babe.
Arnold. So what Arnold said way back in the day before people even knew much, he actually had it right, but he wasn't a chemist per se, right? He was like bodybuilder, but he'd always say, I rate my proteins based on how much gas they give me. If I have a lot of gas, then it's not a good protein. And people laughed at him, but he was right. What he was saying is that if you don't get a lot of gas and bloating when you eat a protein, that means it was digested, so it's probably a better protein for you.
Okay.
And so he was able to rate his proteins and protein powders based on his gas.
Wonderful. Super. Thanks for that.
Thanks, Arnold. So he was ahead of his time. He knew what it was. But from the chemistry standpoint, it really is key that you want to break it down. You want to break the protein down to a peptide, and then that peptide, you want other enzymes to come in to break it down to single amino acids. And here's what's cool, and why it's so cool, is we have the protein, we have all these amino acids, and the body can't use them unless they're broken down to single. So we take the protein, it breaks it all the way down to little amino acids.
And then what are those amino acids used for?
That's the cool thing. Whatever the body needs.
Wow.
So it starts assembling them back.
Okay.
Right? So we have the protein, that meat broken all the way down to single amino acids in the bloodstream. And now the body starts putting them back together for things to maybe carry nutrients around, high density lipoproteins.
So lots of times people associate proteins and amino acids with just bigger muscles, but that is false. What are amino acids good
Well, it's
for?
false. It is critical.
We do need those for muscles.
But for other things.
But I mean, most people think that's just what it's what they're for.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And so it helps to be able to build bones. We have to have proteins, right? Hormones are still a factor there. Fats help, but we need the proteins that actually is structure of the hormones in the body. Think of every tissue in the body is made out of, at least in portion, proteins. That's why we call them protein amino acids, the building blocks of the body. Is the body will take these, and so also think about things like insulin and glucagon and all the other really critical hormones in the body. Are a bunch of these amino acids are put together, right? And so the body uses fat to kind of create that base for them to happen, but we have these peptides running around the body that are signalers to the body to make growth hormones, signalers to make testosterone, signalers for brain function. And so these peptides that are just amino acids put together, right, are critical. So the peptides are important. The body will make and assemble these amino acids, the full proteins, your muscle, your bone, and other tissues. And, we can't overlook muscle, because, and I know it's talked about a lot, you think protein muscle, but it is critical that you have the amino acids in the bloodstream to be able to build muscle. And most people will eat protein, thinking it's going to help with their muscles. But if it's not broken down and digested as single amino acids so it can be assembled back, it's not doing the body any good.
Right. In fact, it's doing the body some harm.
Absolutely.
Right?
It's actually causing harm.
Yeah. So, and when your protein doesn't get broken down and it settles different places, what do you have?
Well, then we got problems. So let's get an example real quick, because I think this is really important, and I think it's overlooked many times. So let's take milk, right? So if we take milk, and remember, there's two types of proteins in milk. One of them is whey that we talked about, and the other's casein.
Okay.
So it's just the forms of protein that are in dairy, right? And so let's say we drink that homogenized, pasteurized milk, and it comes in the body, and the body says, okay, we have these proteins in here, we're going to break them down. And we got the whey, and we go to break it down, and we have the casein protein. And just like any protein, the body's going to use enzymes to break it down.
Right.
But if it can't break that protein all the way down to single amino acids, and that structure, like say 7 amino acids bound together, somehow gets into the body, like a leaky gut, right? We don't have the healthiest tummy in the world type thing, in the flora. And then it gets in there, it's floating around the body, and it's this peptide that's foreign. The body starts attacking it and attacking it. And it just so happens that that peptide, that casein, right, that comes from the milk, looks just the same as the islets in the pancreas that secrete insulin. So now all of a sudden the body's attacking itself, starts attacking that tissue because it looks kind of like that casein protein. Yeah. And now all of a sudden we get diabetes because the body didn't break that protein all the way down to single amino acids. And because there was a little bit of a structure left, whatever that structure was that got in, that amino acid blend, if it would look like the tissues that the body makes insulin from, it's going to start attacking those. If it's the tissues in the joints, it starts attacking those. We get rheumatoid arthritis. We get all these different autoimmune diseases that come many times from not digesting your proteins all the way down to the single amino acids. So that's why it's critical you eat proteins that are easier to digest.
And that is also why, one of the reasons why Doug is so fascinated and pushes digestive enzymes so much, right?
Absolutely.
They are imperative.
They are imperative. And I think that you can start off with just saying, look, what are the easiest to digest proteins? So remember with carbohydrates, we want the complex carbs, the ones that a little bit slower, can be confusing a little bit. The carbohydrates you want the slower to digest. The proteins, you really want ones that break down quicker in the body without giving the body the chance to, have these peptides get in. You want them to single amino acids. So let's talk about the best proteins, the easiest to digest proteins that are out there.
Okay, so the easiest to digest proteins, really think about the more active the animal, right? If we're talking about animal proteins. Yeah. Okay, so if we're specifically talking about animal proteins, the more active the animal, the better the meat, the easier the meat is to break down within the body, correct?
Absolutely, and that is a trick of the trade, or a real important fact that most people don't realize. And if you just think what Hilary just said, you got it made. Because think about it. What are the laziest animals out there, right? Pigs, cows. And so they're the harder to digest proteins. But yet, how come cows red meat, but yet we can have wild game? And why is that digest better and is it better for you? Is because that animal is more active. And so it's just a simple way to look at it. There's a few caveats to that, but it's just a great way for us to look at our proteins if we're an animal protein eater. And then
even easier than breaking down animal protein is plant proteins, right?
Right. So your lentils, your beans, those things, your soy, and those are great forms of protein. I think get kind of a bad rap once in a while. Right. But the strongest animal pound for pound on the planet that we know of is a gorilla, and it only eats vegetable proteins. So I'm just saying, or plant proteins. And so I think it's just important to understand that we want to stay away from, for the most part, the proteins that are hard to digest. And the other factor with it is acidic.
Right.
Is the more acidic the protein, the more harm that it causes, and the harder it is to break down.
Right, and then also we get into the antibiotics that are given to animals, and then the havoc that wreaks on the body and everything. So, okay, so we've got are we done with proteins?
Well, let's see, the most acidic proteins are the red meat and the pork, right? And so we want to stay away from them. That's why most people in the fitness world, the bodybuilders, they say chicken, turkey, fish if you're a meat eater. Chicken, turkey, fish. Right. Absolutely true. Right. That's a great way to go about it, is to think your proteins are more clean, less acidic. Okay, and so that's really the key. And I want to make one more point.
Okay.
It's because this comes up a lot with protein, and you have people say, big argument. You can go on and look at all the YouTube videos, all these so-called experts talking about this. Drives me bonkers. It's like the body can only assimilate so many grams of protein, right? And so you can only have so much protein and all this. Let's put that. Can we put that to rest?
Sure.
You
Let's
ready?
do it.
Here's the
I'm ready.
truth. Is the deal is with proteins is you can give the body hundreds of grams of protein, and it will eventually digest it. Hopefully, you can do that, but the body can only digest so much protein at one time for muscle protein synthesis. So if you're thinking about building muscle and that, the body can only handle so much at one time. The rest of it hopefully gets digested and utilized in other areas and stuff. So the whole argument is good for you, it's bad for you. Look, the deal is if you're wanting protein, which a lot of people think protein for, to be able to keep their muscles strong and to help with their metabolism and that, then just realize that you can only consume so much at one time. That's why when we get into diets, we talk about people that eat a whole bunch at one time, right? Like short windows, intermittent fasting. Why they lose muscle is because they might take in the right amount of grams of protein for a day, but they did it all at one time, and only so much can be used for muscle protein synthesis at one time.
Okay.
And so both sides are kind of right? All right. And so I just wanted to make that point, and that's why you should really break up your protein consumption through the day if you're wanting your proteins to be used for muscle protein synthesis or to be available to keep that going all the time.
Okay, I love it. Okay, so instead of going into micronutrients, we should probably wrap up a bit, right?
Let's do that.
Okay.
And so let's wrap up a little bit to understand that we're talking about taking in the right amount of macronutrients to be able to support the body, to have enough energy, right, and nutrients for life.
Did we discuss sucralose?
Yes, and aspartame.
Did we? Or did we do it previously?
No, we did.
We did?
I ripped on it. Okay. No sucralose, no aspartame. Get me going. We're going to do a complete podcast on that. Okay. Just that.
Okay.
But for today, what is the take home? Hopefully you've learned a little bit. And I know this is a little bit long podcast in detail, but this is one of the most important subjects you could ever in your entire life learn, because back to the 2019 Lancet study, it's the most important factor when it comes to your health.
Right.
Is nutrition. So you need to know macronutrients. You need to know carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. So let's quickly go over one more time what foods are carbohydrates, proteins, and fats. Then we're going to teach you how to find out how much you need and just a good little tool to be able to help you.
Okay, so your carbohydrates come in the form of complex or simple. Your carbohydrates or complex carbs are your fruits, your vegetables, and your grains.
Yep, and a few caveats to that is there are a few fruits that digest faster. They might call them simple carbs. But if you have fruits in your diet, just make sure you consume multiple fruits at one time, right? So watermelon is a little bit more of a simple, right?
Or add it with other things that you're eating.
Other berries,
add
things
it to
like
your
that.
steel-cut oats, that kind of thing.
Absolutely.
Right.
Okay.
And then, so we have your carbohydrates, your fats.
So complex, let's go simple now. The simple, the bad ones.
Okay.
Right?
Your sodas.
Your sodas, a white flour is king of the bad carbohydrates, table sugar. And the rule of thumb with carbohydrates and sugars is to limit your sugar intake to under 50 grams a day. In other words, the straight sugars that are found in all of your pastries and boxed items, bars, everything. Just look at that and say, okay, how many grams of sugar in it? Limit it to 50. So that's your carbohydrates, right?
Okay.
Carbohydrates, fruits, vegetables, grains. Limit your sugar intake to under 50.
Not counting raw fruits.
Not counting raw fruits.
Okay, and then we have your fats. So we want to stay away from anything fried. We do not want to consume fried fats. We want to have more raw nuts, cold pressed oils, your extra virgin olive oils,
right.
Your avocados,
coconuts, and then remember with the fats, we have the fats come in the form of the bad fats and the good fats, and the good fats are all those things, but the bad fats, not just fried, but hydrogenated. And look at the label, okay? Again, that's where they slam hydrogen at it to kind of make it a solid, and it's extremely bad for you because it turns it into what's called a trans fat, something that actually is very damaging to the body. It actually causes free radical damage, kind of like outside metal will start to rust. Same thing happens inside the body from these free radicals and trans fats in the body. So fats, very important. Let's mention again, carbohydrates is 4 calories per gram. The
fats is more like 9 to 10 calories per gram.
Best way to do it is call it 10, because think about it. If you look at a label and it says 10 grams of something, out of 0 to it's 100 calories. It just makes it simple. Okay.
And then we have our proteins. So our lean proteins are your chickens, your turkey, your fish. You can also get eggs for protein, egg whites. What else?
Well, then you got your plant proteins, right? Your lentils, your beans. Soybeans is a great one with that. And then again, most foods will have some level of a carbohydrate, protein, or fat in them. It's just we're talking about the main factor with it. And what makes a protein healthier or not really comes down to, can the body break it down to amino acids? Remember, the protein's a whole bunch of amino acids, 100 or more, and we want to break it down past the peptides, which is 2 to 99, all the way down to single amino acids. So that really determines how healthy a protein is. That's why we're really big on pre-digesting proteins and adding enzymes to them. And that's where the red meats and the porks, for the most part, if they're from lazy animals, are the toughest because they're more acidic, they're harder to digest. Ask anyone with gout, they'll tell you, because it's hard to break down and it causes issues in the body.
Right.
And there's 4 calories per gram of a protein.
Exactly.
Okay.
So Doug says 60% of your daily calories should come from carbohydrates, based on science. I like the concept, and you can stop me if you want to, but I like the concept of thinking about 50% of my daily consumption is going to come from complex carbs, and then 30% of my consumption is going to come from protein, and about 20% of my daily consumption is going to come from fat.
Right, and the more active you are, the more benefit it is to maybe up that protein a bit, and there's nothing wrong with that. You think because of our job working, right, in the NBA with the athletes and everything, that would be extremely high protein people, and Hilary does eat a lot more protein than most, but I'm not the big fan of extremely high protein diets personally, and we'll get into the diet thing another day, but for this talk today, the key is to make sure that whatever amount of protein you're taking in, that it's easily digested, and if you're more active, then absolutely you can get away with taking in more protein. So whether it's 60 carb, 20 protein, 20 fat, or 50, right, 30, 20, those are pretty, basic, simple understandings of the amount of the macronutrients each one you should have in the body. So a lot of people are sitting there saying, okay, carbs, proteins, fats, I think I gotta understand which foods are carbohydrate, which ones are protein, which one's fat. And you're talking now about percentages
but how many calories should I eat in a day?
Yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. Okay, so Doug has his fun little tool. So let's explain your 14-12-10 rule. Okay,
we'll do that. The ultimate is we have all kinds of cool equipment. Gives you a resting metabolic rate. You blow into the tube, and it gives you in 10 minutes. You know exactly how many calories a day your body burns. We can do VO2 max. We can do all this crazy cool stuff, right?
Really cool stuff.
But not everyone has access to that, and you don't really need it. Here's a rule of thumb, okay, to make it simple: 10, 12, 14. If you're wanting to maintain your weight, then usually you'll times your body weight by 12. So, for example, if you weighed 100 pounds, it would be 1,200 calories, okay? And if you're wanting to gain a little bit, then you times it by 14. So like 1,400 calories, you weigh 100 pounds. And if you're wanting to reduce body fat, you times it by 10. So if you take someone that 140 pounds and they're wanting to really reduce body fat, 1,400 calories, right? Times it by 10, 1,400 calories, and that's a good caloric intake. And then from there, you just break down how much of that 1,400 calories, right, is carbs, proteins, fats, whether it's 60 carb, 20 protein, 20 fat, or
50, 30, 20.
Exactly. Mm-hmm. And so you're like, okay, well, that still doesn't do me any good, because what do I do from there? Well, then there's trackers, and this is really where the rubber meets the road, people. The deal is that you need to go to school for nutrition, since nutrition is so important. Well, how do you do that? You listen to this podcast, and then you find a tracker, and for a period of time, not your whole life, maybe even just for a few months.
Yeah, just for a period of time, track your food. And what that does for all of us is it gives us a better understanding of not only what we on a daily basis are consuming as far as protein, carbs, and fats goes, but it also makes us more aware of just how much fat is within a certain food or even kind of a bigger one to me is the knowledge of just how much sugar you're consuming in a day. I like the concept of starting to track before you ever really try to narrow in how many calories you're eating. Right? Because if you're just starting, if you're just new at this, I love the concept of, okay, I'm going to start tracking today, and I'm not going to worry about really changing my diet yet. I'm just going to track what I typically eat. And most people are astounded at how much sugar, number one, they're consuming in a day, right? And then also kind of some empty calories that are unneeded.
Big time. And so there is a little app that we made. It's called 63 for Me. So this is in my app store, right? And this is 63 then for me, and you'll click it. You don't have to use our app. It's just one that we made. There's a lot of other, macronutrient counters out there.
MyFitnessPal is a big one.
MyFitnessPal is a huge one, right? Owned by Under Armour, I think. And so, but if you go to like 63 for Me, in there is a macro counter. So you're going to put the calories in, just like we talked about, times your weight times 10, 12, or 14, depending on your goals. And then in there you can be able to decide 60 carb, 20 protein, 20 fat, or
50, 30, 20,
50, 30, 20, or whatever you want it, right? 80, 10, 10,
50,
whatever you
25,
want.
25. It's just
And so
100% of your calories.
Absolutely. Just do 100%. You put that in there, and then as you go through the day, the app allows you to simply track it. And so like with 63 for Me, you can even speak in it. Say, I had an egg, a piece of toast, and a glass of orange juice, whatever it might be, and it'll come up and you can make sure it's right and do that. Or you go to Subway.
You can scan the barcode. You can scan a barcode and it'll bring it up and you enter that in. Or you can type in Subway sandwich and it'll bring that up and you can track that. So even if you just start off basic and you don't break down every meal exactly how you had it, just getting a basic understanding of how many calories you're consuming in a day and what macronutrient percentages you're getting within a day, and sugar, how much sugar you're getting in a day will really
absolutely
help.
So let's give you the final assignment, right, for today, and that is understand what macronutrients are. Nutrition, right, from the macro standpoint, carbs, proteins, and fats. Which foods are carbs, which ones are protein, which ones are fat. Take the time at 3 months. Just challenge you to do 3 months of finding a macro counter, 63 for Me, right, MyFitnessPal, something, and track your food. It takes, on average, the research shows that people spend an average about 12 to 13 minutes a day once they get good at it. It might be 15 to 20 at first, but 12 minutes a day to find out exactly how many calories you're consuming, what your percentage of proteins, fats, and carbs are, and then you just work to make them clean. And with the 63 for Me app, you're actually following some habits each day, like no fried food, right? No carbonation, that. So it's going to help you eat cleaner macronutrients for those 63 days. Do that. I haven't tracked for 20 years, but I know how many calories a day I'm eating and about my percentage, and yet I don't track because I tracked for a period of time.
And he's maintained his weight for...
Yeah, about 30 years. I haven't gone more than 5 pounds or so off. But it's just because I know the amount of calories, right? And so, again, this isn't something you're going to spend all day tracking and that the rest of your life. Like, hey, I don't have all the time for this. Doug and Hilary, what's the deal? No, you don't have all the day to be able to have to focus on all this. But you need to spend part of it, and you have to be real with yourself. Most important thing is nutrition. Learn nutrition. Learn what carbs, proteins, and fats are coming to the body, how much you're consuming. You'll be amazed, right? Limit your sugar intake to under 50 grams a day, and your life will change. Whatever your goals are for your body fat-wise, health and fitness, will become a reality when you understand macronutrients.
That's it. You said it all.
Well, let's finish with this, okay?
We have another finisher?
Yeah, this is a finisher. I think, 3-time Miss Natural Olympia, right? Pro Figure Masters, and if it really comes down to, let's be real, okay, for just to end here with this, you have hundreds and hundreds of women across the world, right, that want to be, there are figure competitors if you add up everyone in there, but you only have a few at the top. What is the difference maker between the top figure competitors on the planet, right, and the rest of them when really it comes down to it? What is the most important factor?
Nutrition.
Nutrition. 100%. So if the top athletes in the world is nutrition, when the Surgeon General tells us, and you hear that study from the Lancet, that the most important thing to be able to be able to stay off disease in conditions like that, to be able to help live a long, healthy life is nutrition. Nutrition is something you should focus on. So hopefully you got that from the podcast today. Miss Natural Olympia, Hilary?
The Formulator.
Watch your macros.
See you
Keep
next
chewing.
time.